I'm pleased to introduce tonight's speakers. Since their biographies appear in your program notes, let me simply say that since establishing their studio in 1998, Maureen Mooren and Daniel van der Velden have established themselves as among the most innovative and thought-provoking graphic designers in the Netherlands. This accomplishment is no small feat, given the intense creativity of contemporary Dutch design. For me, their work, and hopefully this will become more evident to us during their presentation, is both conceptually and aesthetically provocative, and positions itself more within an editorial frame of mind and a set of references than merely the conventional fulfillment of a design brief. I am particularly glad that they have been able to take time out of their very busy schedules and travel to Minneapolis to share with us their work. Please help me welcome Maureen Mooren and Daniel van der Velden.
Okay, so you've been all really busy today. It was a long night. Thanks again, Andrew. Thanks for having us here. Lisa, also many thanks. Thanks for your patience. You were a wonderful audience. Thanks. So, I guess before we all going to have drinks and enjoy the rest of the evening while discussing more important things than design, perhaps are there any questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I'm wondering if you can tell me how your new logo for the Holland Festival relates to Dutch design in general?
It's great that you mentioned it, actually. Something we forgot to mention during the actual lecture. Actually, the Holland Festival is a yearly classical music, opera and theater festival in Amsterdam with an international reputation. End of last year, we were asked to redesign its identity and to develop a poster series for the new festival. And this is the new logo, or sign as we prefer to call it. Without initially being intended to, the project became a hyper-fetishistic celebration of its own enigmatic sign, which is supposed to stand for all that has been going on in Dutch society for the last couple of years. Dutch design, from a historical and critical point of view, is seen as an extension of the Dutch welfare state of the 20th century. The rational, reasonable, liberal, Protestant, democratic foundations of Dutch society were mirrored by either design work that directly amplified such values or by experimental work emerging from the protected enclaves that the welfare state maintains for the arts. In this wealthy, much quoted, consensus-oriented climate that everyone associates with Dutch design, ultimately resulting in the so-called polder model of the late 1990s, there was progressively less and less political space to conquer for design, as there seemed to be no losers. But since some years, socio-political conditions which once seemed foreign or exotic to the state of Dutchness have changed that situation. Holland is now a country where right-wing parties define the political agenda, and politicians compete in exploiting xenophobic populist fears and hopes. Note that Dutch citizens are now statistically close to Italians in their mistrust of the sitting government. At the very least, the picture has become more complicated and layered than before, making touristy cliches about the Netherlands' cleanliness, open-mindedness, tolerance, and preference for straightforward simplicity simply unfit to do the job of saying what Holland is. In a nutshell, we are up to re-evaluate what Dutchness is. It's no surprise that the corporate identity for an institution like the Holland Festival is seriously affected by the situation described. The previous Holland Festival logo, designed by Anton Beke in 1995, probably you're familiar with him, says Holland Festival in red and blue, Franklin Gothic bold. It's a celebration of being Dutch. No nonsense, simple, red, white and blue, a Dutch tricolore of post-war happiness. Thus, Holland Festival is also, through its colors, connected to Dutch identity. After the rise or more visibility of international radical terrorism, the following economic depression, as well as other striking events in Dutch society, it would be naive to reinforce stable and therefore safe ideas about Dutch identity into a new logo for a new era. As a result, we have designed not a logo, but a sign. There's a slight but important difference between the two. A logo is a translation of a functional program of demands, is to a certain extent a product of corporate culture, where intentions are totally rationalized before they can become form. An organization deciding on its logo is like a marriage based on a dating profile. Whereas a sign, contrary to the logo, is capable of attracting a multiplicity of meanings and interpretations despite its clarity. And what exactly is this sign? Is it a gate, a cross, a fence, a building, a condenser, a crossroads? Is it maybe a grave? The sign does not obey the same rules as the logo. The sign is free to exist beyond its host. The Holland Festival sign has the freedom not to stand for the Holland Festival. It's completely open to interpretation. By adding a vertical bar to the left of the sign and a horizontal bar to the right, the initials HF emerge, Holland Festival. In this poster series, relations are sought between the sign and the Holland Festival's theme, Heaven and Hell. The diagonal windows, or arlequinos, are functioning as a background image. Any more questions?
I'd like to follow up on my first question. I'm wondering if you can tell me about the strange patterns of arlequinos. I mean, isn't that some kind of fallback into decorative pre-modern times?
Definitely. Indeed. Arlecchinos are a pattern from 17th century Italian popular theater. They are also a feature on certain brands of socks and lamb's wool jumpers, which more or less fits with the age and income range of the Holland Festival's average target group. I hope that answers your question. Any more questions?
Yeah, I've got one. For the last 3 years, you have designed the newspaper Yawn Moat, which is an A5 newsprint promotion for the Yawn Moat Gallery in Brussels. Why a newspaper?
Yawn Moat came to us with rather constrained ideas about size and budget. The only way his preferred A5 format could be made productive would be by making it in a miniature. In fact, a downside, something else. But what? We quickly decided it should be a downside newspaper, for reasons both connected to ourselves, Jan and Brussels. The exact reasons, no idea. It was an intuitive decision, perhaps because we thought that a miniature newspaper printed on a real newsprint would be just beautiful.
Okay, but why are there empty areas on the newspaper?
It is rather interesting that you notice this. These empty areas are called voids. We notice, of course, that a newspaper never has an empty space left. It is always completely stuffed with material. We found out that creating empty space in a newspaper by blocking out text with white rectangle leaves intact the idea of a full newspaper. At the same time, creating a sense of emptiness in the pages. These zones were named voids.
Do you feel constrained by your clients, or do you enjoy dealing with very specific demands?
In the case of Jan, we feel a very personal relationship with him. This means we felt with him that there had to be something personal about the publication. Jan came to us to try to something else. Attracted by some of our work, but appalled by other pieces, instead of deepening that gap, we searched for a bridge to his gallery based on what it was, instead of trying to make it something it wasn't. At the same time, Yawn Moat cannot be compared to any general client. If a client manages to communicate very specific demands to us, without appearing professionalized to do so, we'll work with these demands as treasures, for they most likely contain something interesting. Are there any more questions? Or can we go for a drink now?
I have a question. Why are newspapers all the same? And why is change in newspaper design so slow?
That's a good question, Chad. Thanks. Typeface for USA Today was created by a Dutch designer, Gerard Unger. You must have heard from him. But yes, that's as far as innovation goes in newspapers. Newspapers are outside the scope of innovative graphic design. They can only be upstyled, but not changed. 1.5 years ago, we proposed a few ideas to the Volkskrant, the People's Journal, a newspaper from a socialist Catholic background. The proposal centers around new ways of dealing with visual material. Unlike the case of the Yawn Moat Gallery, there is no emphasis on the poetry of the newspaper. This is a series of interventions based on mobilizing the newspaper into visual culture. The day we presented this proposal, Saddam Hussein had been caught, which was the reason for a front cover transparent advertisement of Tommy Hilfiger, the commander-in-chief of the axis of evil, amidst the beauty ideal of American sportswear. Politically questionable as it is, fact is that more and more often front covers are sold as advertisements. Now, with technological refinement of printing techniques, it might be possible to add extremely small elements to pages and articles, the so-called hotspots, here indicated by the red dots in the articles. In this page, on the poor city of Rotterdam, a hotspot is located. At a closer look, this hotspot turns out to contain a myriad of microscopically small images, each of them much bigger than a period, following a sentence. These are images of Rotterdam, the troubled city. There are images of Pim Fortuyn and his many fan clubs, the crew of the bowling center Zuidplein, a distressed Feyenoord football player on his very first training, a populistic choice of images, but it's a people's newspaper after all. Per page, more than one hotspot are possible even without disturbing senior readers. Just like a Tommy Hilfiger ad would be about commercial layering, see Saddam Hussein, there could also be poetic layering. For example, an optimistic stocks page, here with sunlight falling over it. If one would consider images as holes in the page, we are once again back at the idea of an image as a window on the world. That window can be anything. A rundown dead-end street, social reality in big cities, or an article about Israel's hidden weapons of mass destruction. So, to answer your question about why newspapers never change, we don't know. But the newspaper dismissed this proposal by calling it art. And to us, that's an insult. Okay, I think it's time to round up the evening. It's kind of late, and I guess we all need to stretch our legs. Is there one final remark, maybe?
Yes, I have a question. What about fact and fiction in design? How do they relate?
I suppose that you mean fiction in writing and its role in design. The relationship between fiction and design developed under the direct influence of interpersonal communications on design. An influence that is, as said before, linked to the rise of internet, mobile telephone and email. During the rise of these new and powerful communications media, so-called intersubjectivity has begun replacing objectivity. You can imagine what that means to graphic design. The impact is enormous. It's like we've bet all that we had on the one thing that doesn't make it into the new millennium. The form of the letter, in the disguise of email, SMS and MSN, becomes dominant over almost all other forms of written communications. New Labour's election campaign, 4 years ago, used as a billboard a gigantic scale yellow 3M post-it note. If everything becomes a note, where are the facts? As designers, we exist because we communicate facts, events, destinations. At the same time, these will only fulfill a marginal role in the lives of the readers and users. These events are announced from an objective position that denies the intersubjective communications network in which the information arrives. We thought to reserve this by announcing the events in a fictional context. See, for instance, the Rome invitations, made for a Rotterdam-based art space. In these letters, real information on real events, people and places is communicated through a fictional story. Perhaps it's best to read one.
Okay, well, we have only one here, unfortunately, which is that long. So it's maybe not a good idea to read one, but to give you a feeling of what fiction in design, how terribly painstakingly horrible that can be. You might not have time for my gallery info. Here it is anyway, and it's not that I don't want you to read it now. I would like you to actually read it, but I realize you might not feel a deep need to read what I've written just because it isn't your thing. You haven't really gone through all that I've been through, which I admit is not your fault. So I will be fully understanding if you would say at this moment, that's it, finished, I don't want to be involved, I don't want to know your gallery info. That's a valid statement in itself. I mean, as I said, I know you have little time. You might have info at your disposal which you find more suitable, conceptually more engaging, or simply more fun to read. If that's so, fine, I won't stop you. I hope that you will not be offended by my gallery info, because I know that you know that the gallery info is delivered to you with the underlying expectation that you will visit a gallery opening that's announced. If reading the info is already a painstaking process, then attending this opening must be even more demanding. It is an effort that you probably not will be wanting to make, but if you would, I would totally support you in this. In fact, I think that is an effort you should make. To read means to engage. It is the same commitment that you expect from me, to deliver gallery info to you in a way that's interesting to read, easy to remember, and outstanding in its visual quality. I hope not to have discouraged you in this reading my gallery info. Reading, after all, is not something we do so easily. We do it all day, but we don't actually realize constantly what we are entangled in the intellectual process of words becoming meanings. The web of meanings which has developed now already may cause your head to spin. Enough reason to call this a project of reading gallery info rather than just a display of dates and names. The project in this case is you reading my gallery info, and the gallery info itself, well, that's quite another project of mine. I am, so to speak, the project manager of many projects, including you reading my text, and I don't think I'm doing so bad, because you're still reading, aren't you? I am feeling you are somehow reluctant to go on reading, maybe just because you've never dealt with gallery info before. But I have, and I hope you realize that it's my work you are reading here, that it took me time and effort to put this all on paper. Words on paper remain unread when they are not exposed to a reader, and in this case, the reader, that's you. But don't get me wrong, I don't want to limit your options to the role of a reader. If you have better ideas, if you want to edit the gallery info or comment on it, please feel free to do so. Our project is not one of disinformation, but one of mutual engagement and even maybe love. I am actually doubting whether it was a good idea to have you look at this gallery info. Maybe we should call it a day and consider the whole project a failure. I realize now that it's after all my gallery info, and I'm feeling as if my gallery info, which is naturally mine, will have to remain mine. I am thinking that the act of reading it, the project of you getting involved in my gallery info, was premature. I should have better waited until I was really sure that I wanted to involve you. One is confronted with gallery info and one naturally wants to read it, which is what you are doing now. It's not that I don't want you to read on the contrary, I'm not just now suggesting that we might better postpone the whole project. Postponing is on the other hand not possible. The delivery of gallery info can never be postponed until after the opening, because it is precisely the traffic of people towards the opening that the gallery info is supposed to propagate. So let's go back a few steps. You have never heard of me and never heard about the fact that you're about to read gallery info. What would happen in this situation? You would be confronted with the information straight away, without being asked anything and without being prepared. I hope this makes you aware of the importance of me asking you whether you want to read my gallery info, and the difference this makes with other gallery info delivered in a more usual manner. I see our project as a two-way process. My gallery info takes the form of an active dialogue in which both sender and receiver are involved in a multi-layered process of pull and push before the final payload, the gallery info, is being delivered. I do realize that I'm taking much of your time, but I do want you to realize too that this gallery info comes to you for free. You're absolutely right when you say that gallery info could be delivered faster, but what interests me is just gallery info delivered better. I feel we've arrived at the point here where I feel more safe to share my gallery info with you. I feel as if I can be a little less protective about it and offer you the actual information, but not without a prelude. It's in fact a prelude that you should cooperate in. It's a game. The game, which concludes our project, has the basic rule that you are only allowed to continue reading when with every word you read, you actively memorize sentences like I do respect the gallery info that I'm about to read. I am enjoying the two-way process that I'm engaged in. I do want to participate actively in this gallery. I will attend the gallery opening. I am thankful of being offered the opportunity to read information free of charge. I will store the gallery info that I'm about to read in my mind, just like I know my mother's name, my father's name, my own name, and my own date and place of birth. If you're unwilling to participate in this game, the gallery info that I'm about to disclose will remain unknown to you forever. Please remind that with every single word you read, you must memorize sentences like the above. It's working, you see. Together, we've turned our project into a wonderful, loving mantra. Then the gallery info is disclosed out of focus. You have probably noticed that the gallery info I presented to you was out of focus, therefore unreadable. You might be worried now that this was because of a system malfunction on either side. Don't worry, such is not the case. There is no damage to your eyes or mind, and my equipment is all fine. The reason that the gallery info that I presented to you was blurred was just because I wanted to perform a small test on you. My fear came true. You got angry. As I said before, it's not an easy thing for me to share my gallery info with you. This is why I hope we could view it as our project, our manifesto. Instead now, at the slightest error, you become furious with me and with our project, and potentially also with the gallery info itself. There was plenty of reason for you not to get angry, but have thoughts of support and care, which would make things easier for both of us. Thoughts like, I do want to provide help with presenting this gallery info in a more focused way. Perhaps it's merely by human error that this gallery info became unfocused, or maybe we can get this gallery info back in focus together. Nothing of that, you just became angry. I would like to try one more time. This time I will not react so understandingly when you get angry. It's because of personal reasons. I'm a loving person. I am someone who wants to be understood, but I get suspicious when I know that I'm not being understood, but instead closely monitored. I see this as a severe border put on the communicative freedom that I have and that any other citizen has to publish gallery info. Yes, that includes you. You too could become a publisher of gallery info. Then the gallery info is delivered out of focus again. I do regret what happened. A technical error occurred by which my gallery info became visually distorted. As before, you can be sure it wasn't your eyes. It was my equipment, but this time it was no test. The blurring was real, and I offer my apologies for the fact that my gallery info didn't come across to you. I have, however, noticed that your reaction was warm and heartfelt. By now, I know you care about my gallery info. Exhibition title, NOG. Participating artists, Lisa Kouwenberg, Wim Konings, Olvaart den Otter. Curated by Olvaart den Otter. Opening Friday, May 17, 8 p.m. Duration May 18, June 1, 2002. Location Rome, Benthuizerstraat 96B, Rotterdam.
Other projects where we have dealt with fiction include For Real, a catalogue for the Stedelijk Museum Amsterdam, where all information, pictures and text is duplicated and shown twice, first as reality, then as fiction. The introduction of fiction as a design tool could be described as a voice that is also presented in a magazine like Arcus, but it would be really too much to go into that. More questions?
Not so fast. I was wondering why you guys don't show us more about Arcus, especially this project has been so important in your work.
Can you be more specific? I mean, what do you want to know?
Well, two things that I'm especially interested in are the use and misuse of style conventions in Arcus and how the form relates to the content.
Okay, for those of you who don't know, Arcus is an architectural and visual culture magazine appearing bi-monthly that we redesigned and may say reconceived in 2001. For Arcus, we've chosen to steal existing magazine topologies and even complete magazine layouts whose looks are used as a container for our own content. I'm gonna show you this. Magazines like Flash Art, Domus, Vogue, etc. By offering a kind of collection of existing magazine forms, Arcus attempts to be many magazines at the same time. It's interesting that a lot of the quoted magazine typologies, initially by their art directors, were aimed to be invisible and often very conventional. Think Time, Newsweek, as well as several highly boring architectural magazines. By quoting them so consciously, these typologies lose their absence and become strongly visible. Simultaneously, there is a less rational design strategy at work aimed at interaction, visual poetry, information painting, and ambiguity. All Arcus pages can be completely torn out, And at the bottom of every page there is another perforation, the flyer, a parallel magazine, a strip of references for found images or trivial associations. So the magazine is divided in different zones. The tension between these zones creates complexity, ugliness, beauty, and surprise. Form versus content is maybe an interesting focus. Not necessarily only how form relates to content, but also if it does at all. Designers have always believed that there was this linear relationship between both. More and more, this linear relationship is unmasked. Maybe content should be considered a front-end quality of design rather than a back-end hidden treasure that design always has to reveal, by which you always end up with a kind of transparent container. We introduced the idea of Arcus and the interactive and referential medium in the first place to prevent it from becoming a boring exercise in headline design. We also thought such a statement of a magazine being part of information culture was needed. A magazine doesn't cover architecture, it is architecture. It cannot be about visual culture, it is visual culture. Arcus should become a physical statement of debate and discussion going beyond the traditional borders between sender and receiver. At least that was the idea. Does that answer your question?
Well, the magazine seems to react to publishing as a fixed and definitive act where the designer produces the final solution. Instead, Arcus presents a metaphorical kit of parts which suggests that the user must assemble or complete them. Except nothing is actually assembled. So how is Arcus interactive?
Well, this is actually quite changed over years. This kit of parts that you call it is now metaphorical, but was a few years ago totally literal. Then we stimulated the readers to contact the editorial office, or even us, by fax, and once even the reader could send a fax to cutting-edge sociologist Ulrich Beck. This was strongly inspired by the peer-to-peer communication systems that Maureen was referring to earlier, naming Napster, for instance. So here you see a page where you could actually create your own diagram / multifunctional building, and you could make a whole list of functions that would go into this building. So this was actually a sort of crash course of becoming a Dutch architect. In that same year, we also issued t-shirt prints for young architects that were actually used by some of them. It was also possible to intervene in one's surrounding social fabric with all kinds of pages, letters and notes. Indeed, later on, the interaction moved to a more metaphorical idea of relations where more the suggestion of an action and its consequences than the action itself were focused on.
Could you give us an example?
Well, for instance, this 2004 issue on mapping, one could fax to the world-famous Swiss architects Herzog and de Meuron, responsible for the gorgeous new extension of the Walker. You could fax them with a heartfelt complaint about all architecture and about architects in general. And in the same issue, we mapped the mind of the architect, based on the portraits of both Basel-based architects. And an intricate system of motorways in a childish drawing style. You see it here on the bottom of the page. Here, you can use the pointer. In that sort of system of freeways, in a childish drawing style throughout the magazine, features architects phoning from their cars. They complain, they compete, they self-applaud, they doubt, they even divorce over the phone. On the road to conferences and meetings where they're invariably arriving hours late. So it's actually not true that there were no interactive possibilities to the later Arcus. Here's one car ad in that mapping issue that will show you a little bit what we mean when we say that we are making a complaint about architects in general. This is a short one, so don't worry. This is actually an existing car ad for Alfa Romeo where we put a text balloon on top. And it says, "As I told you, eternity is where I belong. It's Vitruvius, Palladio, Alfa Romeo and me. As an architect, I'm simply everywhere. I'm in the car in the first place. Then I am in the distance, where the city is looming. I'm also in the rather modernist villa my car is parked next to. In fact, I own the villa. More than that, I designed it. And I am in your mind, because you know, like I do, that I am that architect. My essays, milestones. My thoughts, stardust. My grey matter, insured. My jeans, blockbusters. Someone has statistically found that an architect is your average ideal man. Dressed in black, short hair, reliable, slim, tall. We architects have it all. Look at me in my classy Alpha. Look at you in your dusty Daihatsu. Vanity, not my problem. Vanity Fair, maybe, but first Vogue. By the way, I have to rush now. There's an important conference in Pontresina where I'm scheduled as keynote speaker, and I'm already 3 days late. Unfortunately, my global positioning system has run out of juice. Where the hell is Pontresina? So it's actually not true that there were no interactive possibilities to the later Archis. They were, however, more embedded in the complexity of an issue and less in the idea of a direct intervention. Meanwhile, while the magazine remained, of course, totally perforated. And we did a couple of shows in Stockholm, Lille and Amsterdam, where visitors could collect ripped out pages and flyers from Archis from the floor. And we call this an information landscape. But what you are saying about assemblage is interesting, but it's not necessarily true that there is nothing to assemble. Probably from the torn out pages of Archis, one could resemble information overload itself. I hope this is a sufficient answer to your question.
But why is Arcus unique in the extent that design works like an editorial voice? Does the editorial guide the visual, or does it sometimes work the other way around?
The idea is that the position and role of this graphic design voice does not become too appropriate, but stays always a bit unwelcome. One could say that both visual as well as editorial or textual ideas determine the editorial voice, as long as this voice does not directly amplify a simple message, but instead comments and circumfuses a theme in a way the conventional article cannot do that. So,
do you have a vision of the reader?
We imagine our reader as someone to whom research, experiments and adventure are not restricted to known positions, such as the position of the architect, but are able to move freely, more like a mentality. So in short, we imagine our reader as someone who actually does explore some of the layers and complexities of design and who appreciates on a higher level the strategic position that the magazine is taking with this design. Architects tend to value Archis more once they start to realize that the magazine is in fact a building. Archis miraculously escaped the final verdict that the much praised Dutch subsidy system issued last year. And that verdict was that Archis had to disappear. Archis is now continuing into Volume magazine, but unfortunately we don't have any material of that yet to show. So, can we finish now?
I have another question. You guys have adopted an almost architectural language. You speak about voids, you mentioned typology, and you speak about zones.
It is true that architectural vocabulary sometimes provokes a more useful entry into self-imposed complexity. In these flyers, for Mares, a Dutch art space, different kinds of information, images and texts are being zoned by folding an A3 sheet into an A4 sheet. Each issue is a different way. The surface generated by the folding is a zone. The actual exhibition information is represented through a kind of crossword puzzle, which is always in front. The invitation always contains a magazine article or newspaper clipping about an issue that we consider important. Associative meanings are being separated by the folding lines, but united through the single sheet of paper. More questions?
Yeah, I have another question. You talked about an information landscape, and I'm just a little confused. Can you elaborate on that idea, please?
Maybe that could be explained by an identity we designed for Magazine 3, a prominent art space in Stockholm. The idea is that, contrary to what we think, information is not culture, but nature. It is something that somehow naturally grows, out of our control. In the summer and autumn, Magazine 3 is running an experimental space located in a park by the name of Magazine 3 Project. The setting of Magazine 3 Project is rather romantic, in the middle of this huge park. Because of this, we immediately thought of the leaf in relation to information overload. The identity for Magazine 3 Project consists entirely of leaves. Here, the leaf is used as a recycling medium for text and images. This happens especially on the website. One after another leaves appear on the screen filled with a kind of visual waste material. Also when the user is clicking for information. The text quickly gets covered again until the entire screen is full. The same concept was also translated to other media, such as flyers and posters. The website functions as a screensaver or information painting. Capturing magazine 3 is an eternal autumn of falling leaves. Another question?
Yeah, I've got one. I'd like to go back to the Holland Festival and the logo as a fetish, you called it. Rather than designing a fixed logo for the Rotterdam Design Prize, you guys didn't create one at all. Why is that?
As said before, a logo is useless when it doesn't have a massive distribution or when it doesn't contain some kind of commentary. Nevertheless, the logo is the fixation of every organization looking for an identity, no matter how small. Because the logo is in fact never approved by everyone represented by it. It causes recognition and alienation alike. Therefore, any logo replaced by any other logo is as good as any other logo before or after. The Rotterdam Design Prize identity is generated entirely through the usage of printed matter. All publicity material is printed on leftover stock of paper. The flyers are a series of envelopes where every envelope is a layer related to design history. The invitation for the opening of the biennial exhibition is an envelope carrying the text 1958 or Amnesia, Helvetica. As the user opens this envelope, there is another one inside carrying the logo of Arend, a manufacturer of office furniture, sponsor of the event. It's their standard corporate envelope. Inside the Arend envelope, the user finds another envelope with the text 1989, Arial. He has been taken on a historical journey from Helvetica to Arial. Out of this last envelope comes a plain and simple announcement carrying the relevant information of the exhibition and events connected to the Design Prize Rotterdam 2003. Other invitations concentrate on design writing, with text by Richard Hamilton, design classics such as the big ballpoint pen, and statistics. There is no logo, but there are specific choices and therefore is identity. Another question?
Is it true that you guys are involved in creating an identity for an offshore pirate nation?
That's true. Not sure, however, how you got to that information. The project is carried out in collaboration with the Jan van Eyck Academy, and it conceives the identity program for the world's tiniest nation, Principality of Sealand. Notably, Sealand, like the United States, thinks of itself as being the heart of the free world. The entire territory consists of a World War II fortress in the sea. Since 1967, Sealand claims to be a sovereign country. More sea than land, Andrew. Sealand operates in a grey zone where fact and fiction, good and evil, success and failure have all but well-defined boundaries, despite the tiny nation's own efforts to keep things abundantly clear. After Sealand's initiative to launch a commercial data haven, or Swiss bank for internet services on board the platform, with among its initial customers the Tibetan government in exile and the anti-spam organization spamhouse.org, now Sealand is a starting point to rethink issues around identity, design and politics. The Sealand identity is conceived as a schizophrenic double scenario. Sealand's freedom on the one hand is purely symbolic. Sealand, the logo nation in the North Sea, is a freedom prison in which a new symbolic realm is opened up, which is and remains purely a matter of imagination. On the other hand, the only possibility for Sealand to be a real political alternative lies in its disappearance, to be invisible, unnoticed, a stealth country. To be invisible supposes a tactical and strategic absence of identity. Sealand, the imagination, is interesting because built from contradiction. It is a monarchy with the aesthetics of a squat. It is on one level functioning as a completely credible mini-state to those who knowingly accept the contradictions. On another level, the fortress seems the physical endpoint of credibility, a black hole, a network ruin. In a vanishing from the world's information spaces lies perhaps its only alternative to really become a place of freedom and exile at the same time. To design a stealth identity for Sealand is one of the project's key targets. In this project, the possibilities and impossibilities of corporate identity are challenged in a context where there are no boundaries set by a commissioner or neither by a target group. Sealand becomes the so-called floating signifier. the deserted islands becomes the starting point for an overload of iconographic experiments and associations, from heraldry based on search engines to Sealand's website as an information monument. Coins based on the typology of the CD-ROM, data ruins. In non-linear historical accounts, the incomparable is merged together, from Ceausescu's presidential palace to the ruins of Delphi in Greece, from masterminds to Versace, from Google to the so-called grey cards, credit cards from notorious offshore banks operating in their island-based tax havens. A universe of icons that emanate the aesthetics of statehood fed by the unstable conditions of information society. So these are actually these grey cards. And you can see the names of the owners of these banks. These are real offshore banks. These are the real names of the banks, and the names of the owners are embossed in them. So they come all from a rather questionable background. So search-based design. The advertising campaign Main Port to Imagination proposes a new publicity strategy for Sealand. A series of ads seeks to develop a political ideology for Sealand where there is none. Sealand's non-agenda in terms of its socio-political, cultural and historical values makes it very difficult to visualize what Sealand could become or represent to specific global target audiences. The proposals attempt to open up a new international context in which Sealand can be imagined to operate. These proposals create fictive but often subversive models that could all equally become Sealand. Its multiple identities make it completely illegible to let Sealand become branded as a country. And why should it anyway? The different proposals should rather disrupt our day-to-day reality and transfer Sealand's existence into our own day-to-day observation of everyday politics. Here, Sealand exists beyond the binary of good and bad, and legal or illegal. The ambiguity and contradictions of the different target groups and subject matters emphasize that Sealand is in fact lacking an ideology. Sealand could be constructed, reconstructed from trash and from books, like in these models, containing relevant philosophical and political references. Sealand could also be just a shadow. Sealand's initials become PS, postscriptum, Principality of Sealand. And even, this is the shadow nation passing by, so the dead end, the end point of identity. Could also be seen as a shadow which is falling over your magazine. It's all about ways to see yourself. And even dead-end streets will from now on point to this stealth country that enacts an alternative to the contemporary world order from its illegal home-based desert island in complete and total secrecy. This project is co-designed with Adriaan Melligers, Vinka Kruk and Tina Klausmeijer of Jan van Eyck Academy. So, can we finalize? Any more questions?
Yes.
Oh.
Is there a future for the architecture magazine? What's it look like?
When John Lydon, also known as Johnny Rotten, exclamated "no future" as part of his participation in a world-famous punk rock effort entitled the Sex Pistols, he was in a way stating that all that is relevant is happening at this very moment. Just as Sex in the City proclaims there is no more Mr. Right, there only is Mr. Right Now. When you ask if there is any future for the architectural magazine, you are comparing basically the eternal, architecture, and the temporary, magazine, and how they might recombine. Volume magazine, an effort of Archis, AMO, and C-Lab, Columbia University, New York, is one way of forecasting the future of the architectural magazine, just as Arcus was a way of mapping and commenting on the deadlock of contemporary architecture magazines. Volume comes in a box, a plastic transparent box designed by 2x4, New York. Volume attempts to oscillate between teen pop and foreign affairs, knowing that the bandwidth of today's architecture lies between pop star and politician. Two slogans of its initial issue are "We want everything," so it's partially covered, it's in red and blue here, and "To beyond or not to be." So yes, there's a future for the architecture magazine, but there's two things we don't know. If the future architecture magazine is still about architecture, will architecture in the future still look like architecture? Or, if the future architecture magazine is no longer about architecture, what to do if everything turns out to be architecture? If it turns out that world politics, computer science, economics, making love, and the evolution of species are all forms of architecture. Therefore, the architectural magazine of today should be a magazine about everything. It should be about poetry, politics, literature, quantum physics. It shouldn't be about buildings. Jacques Herzog, one of the architects responsible for the gorgeous building that we saw tonight, and that we're sort of half in now, has stated that he wants to become more famous than Madonna. Profession motivated by such goals is no longer served by publications covering buildings with all best intentions. Jacques Herzog is definitely pushing his love over the borderline here. And if we want to serve him, we'll have to provide him with the kind of knowledge that brings him closer to being Madonna. Thank you. Okay, so are there any questions?
I'm wondering if you want to comment on your plan to reform Social Security?
Ma'am, we assure you that whatever we're doing is in the best interest of your country.
Sorry, we couldn't resist that one. Are there questions from the audience? You're all too shy now. Go ahead.
There's one.
Why does the Netherlands always seem to be a step ahead in exploring new boundaries?
Did everyone hear that question?
I don't know. We're not really so for Dutch self-praise, of course.
I think also because we have a long history, of course, in graphic design. I think we grew up with it. And yeah, and that's probably why we also have great commissioners. And I think if you have a good commissioner, you're able to explore and to make innovative work. So.
It's also about the idea. I think that you of course have this whole history of graphic design, which is sort of on your resting on your shoulders. But you're sort of you can temporarily turn it off. You can sort of forget about it, and you can try to explore new ways of dealing with design. I mean, we can in Holland. I would not say that this is just like for anyone in Holland. Of course, it's still something you have to push. But you can be busy with graphic design as if it's your passion, your life. You know, it's not like it's not always like a job. It feels also like fun to do, really, I should say. So, does it answer your question? I think it's almost a non-answerable question.
No, but I think it really has to do with the commissioner. I think if you they are so important. If you have a good commission, then you're able to make great work, and if not, then they stop it. So.
When you start a project, what is the process in which you approach it? How do you go about developing a concept or idea?
Yeah, that depends on the time frame in which the project has to be realized. I mean, we're now unfortunately engaged in a few projects that had to be realized the day after the briefing was given. So you are dealing then with much more superficial ways of getting across a certain statement. But ideally, a project takes, in fact, many years before it, so your first sort of shot is not always the best one. So, for instance, the first issue of Volume is now out. I'm sure that we'll sort of develop that strongly during the coming years, if there's a future for Volume. But I would say that we start by maybe merging qualities of the assignment with ideas that we already have, or that are somehow we couldn't do earlier, or things that we are just thinking about. So it's a combination of treating the assignment as a kind of completely new thing which is coming into your studio and falling sort of back on half realized ideas and dreams, I think, for me.
Or a follow-up.
Or follow-up, yeah,
Yeah.
true, as well.
I think that happens much more, a follow-up, than, I mean, we also have not realized, I mean, how do you say that? Plans who are not realized. But
How do you
I
mean?
think it's, yeah, but it's, I mean,
I don't get it.
things we designed and are rejected. But
True.
it's not possible that we can use them for other ones. So.
I didn't get it, sorry.
No?
No.
No, you were saying, like, what about that it's in a way that you take unrealized stuff for another project? I think it never happens. But anyway,
I
okay, forget it. Next question.
More tricky question.
If there are designers out there that inspire you, maybe we're not familiar with some of the Dutch designers that might, but would you say that there are any inspirations out there? Where do you get your inspiration? Your work is quite creative.
I don't know, for me the inspiration doesn't really come from design.
No, not for me neither.
It comes very strongly from fashion design, from
Yeah.
interior design,
From art
art,
as well.
politics, that kind of stuff. But I mean, we can name you a list of great Dutch designers which are working at the moment. I mean,
It seems like you go to a magazine shop and dig through magazines through.
no, we actually hate doing that. Actually, it's not Arcus is not a love affair with magazines. It's a kind of hate affair with it. We're of course, like when you go. Have you been in the Palais de Tokyo in Paris? Has anyone been there? Yeah, a few people have been there. When you have a magazine store there, you enter. It's like a 5-meter high wall full of Japanese stuff. You know, it's like you enter and it sort of attacks you. And it gives you a kind of hysteria where you want to you have the idea that you're 10 years behind and you want to catch up, you know, and that's a kind of frenzy that design is always trying to provoke. It tries to steer your unrest for a kind of stylistic. It's like food, you know, and you want to have it all. But I think as a professional designer, but as a designer, you have to sort of try to stay in control of that. I mean, we're not out there scanning the latest design stuff, but of course, if something new appears, then we are very impressed. Of course, I remember 1996 or 94, the Designers Republic, where we're in art school, then made a contribution to Emigre, and it was kind of total, you know, hysteria, which overcame you. You see something which you have never seen before. And that as you see more work, and because of globalization, we are supposed to believe that all the work is going to look alike. Everything is going to a kind of global sameness. Then you have that kind of surprise less and less, I guess. But we're very inspired by architecture as well. We're also still big fans of Herzog and de Meuron.
About giving an advice about collaborating?
About collaborating with another person or with a group of people for a design project.
Like you experience difficulties in collaboration?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is that you add things to each other. I mean, you should not have the same kind of style or whatever.
Like you should try to be complementary to each other,
exactly.
rather than excluding. Like there's the kind of collaboration where the lowest common denominator of both people's abilities becomes the output. You know, because like, and then Andrew starts laughing. So that's the kind of collaboration that you should try to change. So it's and also it's not about like, you're not married to the person you collaborate with. You know, it's like so. There's hope.
Are we done?
Okay, it's finally over.
Let's drink.